Lisha had never encountered anything like humanity before. In the vast expanse of the universe, the Araxi Empire had studied countless civilizations, some of them far more advanced than Earth's inhabitants, others less developed. But humanity intrigued her. Their contradictions fascinated her, their ability to create beauty and destruction in equal measure, their capacity for kindness and cruelty, their moments of wisdom and ignorance. It was unlike any species she had ever encountered. Lisha was an operative of the Araxi, a species known for their unmatched intelligence and technological superiority. Their mission across the galaxies was simple: observe, record, and report. They had no interest in engaging with the species they encountered, only in understanding their potential. The Araxi had long believed that the fate of every world was best determined by cold, logical observation. But as Lisha surveyed humanity from her quiet perch, she began to sense something different, something more. It had been a few weeks since Lisha arrived on Earth. She had taken on a human disguise, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. Her mission was to observe, not interfere, but the more she watched, the more conflicted she felt. There was something about the way humans interacted with each other, something in their emotions, in their stories, that made her question the mission she had been given. One afternoon, she found herself wandering through a small park, observing the children playing and the families gathering. It was a peaceful scene, but it also brought Lisha a sense of discomfort. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because she had never experienced such human warmth, or maybe because she was beginning to understand how fragile it all was. She had seen death, destruction, and war on many planets, but humanity was different. Despite the chaos of their world, they fought to survive, to love, to create. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, a commotion caught her attention. Her sharp senses picked up the sounds of yelling, followed by a child's terrified cry. Without thinking, Lisha turned and began to move toward the noise. She didn't know why, perhaps because of her growing empathy toward humanity, or perhaps because of something deeper. Whatever the reason, she found herself rushing through the park, her feet moving faster than she had planned. At the edge of the playground, she saw it, a little girl, no older than 7, standing in the middle of the street, crying for help. Her clothes were torn and her face was smeared with dirt. Her parents were nowhere to be seen, and the child was clearly frightened, looking around as if hoping someone would come to her aid. Lisha's heart, though alien, seemed to ache in a way she didn't understand. It was almost as if the child's pain resonated within her own being. Lisha's training kicked in. She knew the importance of remaining unnoticed, but there was no time for that now. The child was in danger. There was a car speeding toward her, and it was clear the driver wouldn't be able to stop in time. Without hesitation, Lisha sprinted forward, her movements swift and sure. She reached the child just in time, pulling her out of the street and into the safety of the park. The child let out a startled cry but quickly stopped when she realized she was no longer in danger. Lisha knelt in front of her, trying to look as reassuring as possible, though she knew the child could sense something was different about her. Lisha's appearance, though cloaked in human form, still held subtle alien qualities, her sharp features, her eyes that gleamed with an unnatural intensity. But the child didn't seem to care. "Are you okay?" Lisha asked in the most comforting tone she could manage. The girl looked up at her, her eyes wide with fear, and then her lip began to tremble. "Where's my mommy?" she asked, her voice small and fragile. I can't find her." Lisha's heart twisted. She had no answers, no explanations. The mission she had been given had nothing to do with comforting a lost child. But in that moment, all she wanted was to help. She gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, trying to calm her. "I will help you," Lisha promised, though she didn't know how. She stood and looked around, hoping for some sign of the girl's parents. But the park was busy, and there was no sign of the woman or man who had abandoned their child. The fact that the child had been left here alone, without anyone to watch over her, felt wrong. "I'm Lisha," she said, trying to gain the child's trust. "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl replied, her voice still shaky. "Well, Emily, you're not alone anymore," Lisha said, kneeling down again. She looked at the child with as much sincerity as she could muster. "I'll take care of you," Emily sniffed and wiped her eyes. "But I want my mommy." "I know you do," Lisha said gently, "but right now I'll be here, and I won't leave you." Lisha didn't know why she said it, but it felt true. In that moment, she made a decision. She wouldn't leave Emily to fend for herself. She didn't know why she was so determined to protect this child. But there was something in Emily's eyes, something that made Lisha want to keep her safe at all costs. As they walked together through the park, Lisha's mind raced. She wasn't supposed to interfere. Her mission was to observe, to report. But the feeling swelling inside her made it difficult to focus on the task at hand. How could she possibly continue observing humanity without becoming involved in its intricacies? The more she saw, the more she felt the weight of the decision she had made. She didn't know what to do with Emily. She didn't know how to return the child to her parents, or even if she should. All she knew was that something in her had changed. In the brief moments of contact, Lisha had experienced a connection with this human child, something profound, something that transcended the mission. That evening, Lisha brought Emily to a small, quiet hotel, away from the bustling city streets. She didn't have answers, but she could provide safety. That's all she could offer for now. As Emily fell asleep that night in the bed next to hers, Lisha stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. The weight of her mission hung heavy on her shoulders. She was supposed to report back, to analyze humanity's strengths and weaknesses. But now everything felt so much more complicated. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was part of something, and she couldn't shake the feeling that protecting Emily had changed everything. What did that mean for her mission, for humanity? Lisha didn't have the answers yet. But she was starting to realize that humanity was more than just a species to be observed. It was something worth protecting, something she wasn't prepared to walk away from. The days following the rescue were a blur for Lisha. Emily, though still uncertain about her situation, began to open up to Lisha in small ways. She would cling to her during the night, always seeking reassurance that her mother would return. But every time Lisha tried to explain that her parents were nowhere to be found, Emily's small heart would break again. It was a pain Lisha could not erase, but one she could soften, if only a little. Lisha was torn between her original mission to observe humanity and her growing feelings for the child. She never imagined that a simple act of protection could draw her into such a complicated situation. Each day she observed the human world more closely, noting how people worked, how they lived, how they loved, and how they hurt. But with Emily by her side, the lens through which Lisha viewed Earth began to shift. The observations were no longer cold and clinical. They were personal, emotional. And Lisha found herself caring deeply for the girl who had become a symbol of humanity's resilience. Despite her growing attachment to Emily, Lisha continued to worry about what her presence might mean. She had come to Earth with a purpose, to observe and report, to maintain distance. Yet she was failing. Her emotions, which she had kept under strict control for so long, were now beginning to surface, and she found herself unable to ignore them. How could she fulfill her mission when her heart was tangled up in the well-being of a single human child? It wasn't long before Lisha realized that the child's abandonment was not a simple accident. She began to piece together the fragments of the story that Emily had shared in bits and pieces. Emily's parents, it seemed, had fallen into desperate circumstances, fleeing from something much darker than just poverty. They were not just neglectful, they were afraid. They had made deals with people who had dangerous connections, and now Emily was left in the middle of it all. The more Lisha learned, the more disturbed she became. She had thought she had come to Earth simply to observe, But now she was tangled in a situation far beyond her understanding. Her mission had not prepared her for this. The world she had been sent to study was one where families were torn apart by crime and greed, where children like Emily could be left to fend for themselves without even a second thought. Lisha, for the first time, felt helpless. One evening, as they sat together in the hotel room, Emily looked up at Lisha with wide, hopeful eyes. "Will my mommy come back soon?" she asked, her voice quiet and filled with both longing and fear. Lisha hesitated. She had never been good with lies. But this time she didn't want to lie to the child. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'll keep you safe until she does." Emily nodded, accepting the answer without protest, though the sadness in her eyes didn't fade. Lisha, with her alien perspective and vast knowledge of the universe, still couldn't understand one thing: why humans did this to each other. Why did they abandon their own children? Why did they make decisions that caused so much pain? The answer, as she came to realize, was that she would never fully understand humanity by just observing. It wasn't in the patterns of behavior or the data she collected. It wasn't in the statistics and figures of their civilization. It was in the messy, unpredictable emotions they displayed. It was in the love, the fear, the pain, and the hope. These were the things that defined humanity, things that could never be measured in the cold equations of logic. A few days later, Lisha decided to act. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. Emily needed more than just a protector. She needed a future, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. And Lisha realized that protecting Emily meant going against everything she had been taught by the Araxi. It meant stepping into a world she had never known and choosing to make a difference. Lisha began to search for answers. She used her advanced technology to track down any trace of Emily's parents, knowing it would not be easy. The city they were in was sprawling and dangerous, full of hidden corners where criminals and desperate people operated in the shadows. But Lisha wasn't afraid. She was determined to uncover the truth, to find Emily's parents, and to help them reunite. It wasn't long before Lisha found herself on the trail of a criminal organization tied to human trafficking. The deeper she dug, the more disturbed she became. The organization was powerful, with ties to both local governments and corporate entities. It seemed that the world Emily's parents had gotten involved in was far more dangerous than Lisha could have imagined. There was no simple solution to this problem. Lisha knew she could not do this alone. She needed help, but whom could she trust? She couldn't go to the authorities. They would be looking for an excuse to stop her mission, to interfere with her investigation. The Araxi would never approve of her involvement with humans in this way. She was supposed to remain neutral, but that had long since become impossible. It was then that she made a decision. She would stay on Earth. She would continue to protect Emily, but she would also do everything in her power to dismantle the organization that had ruined the lives of so many. She didn't care about her mission anymore. The Araxi could send their ships, their fleets, their armies, but Lisha knew she would fight for what was right. The Araxi had no understanding of humanity's depth. They didn't know what it meant to love, to protect, to fight for something more than just data. Lisha took Emily's hand and led her to the next city, where the criminal organization's operations were more heavily entrenched. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, and the risks were immense. But she could not, in good conscience, leave the child to face a world that was so unjust. Lisha had seen humanity at its worst, but she had also seen its best. The love that people could show for one another, even in the face of terrible circumstances, was unlike anything Lisha had ever known. As they traveled, Lisha began to train Emily. It wasn't for survival, though that was part of it. It was more about self-worth. Emily had been broken, abandoned, and betrayed, but Lisha would not let her stay that way. She would show the child that, despite the darkness, there was still light to be found. She would teach her to stand tall, to fight for herself, and to trust that there were still good people in the world. But Emily was still a child. She still needed to be protected, and Lisha knew that the path ahead would be filled with danger. The criminal organization had eyes everywhere, and they would not hesitate to come after them. But Lisha had become more than an observer. She was a protector now, and she would stop at nothing to ensure Emily's safety. In the midst of this uncertainty, Lisha found herself asking a question she had never considered before. Was this why the Araxi had never truly understood humanity? Because they had never experienced it for themselves. They had never known what it was like to fight for someone they loved, to feel a bond that transcended species, or to make a choice that would change everything. Lisha's understanding of humanity had shifted completely. And as she looked down at Emily, still sleeping peacefully beside her, she knew that no matter what the future held, she would never abandon the child. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. The mission to observe humanity was over. It was time to act. Lisha and Emily had been on the run for weeks, moving from city to city, always staying one step ahead of the criminal organization that had ensnared Emily's family. Lisha had become an expert at evading detection, using her advanced alien technology to cover their tracks and alter their appearances. But no matter how careful they were, the shadow of danger hung over them. Every new place they visited came with its own set of risks, and Lisha knew they couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, the organization would catch up with them. In the quiet moments, when they found a safe place to rest, Lisha couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for Emily. The child had become more than just a human to protect. She had become Lisha's reason for doing everything she did. When Lisha had first arrived on Earth, her mission had been simple: observe humanity, report back, and maintain a distance. But now, as the days passed, Lisha had found herself completely immersed in human emotions, something she had never anticipated. Emily had changed, too. The first days after her abandonment had been marked by fear and sadness, but now she was beginning to show signs of strength. She was more confident, more resilient, and Lisha couldn't help but feel proud of her. Emily was no longer just a scared, lonely child. She was a survivor, a fighter, and Lisha had played a part in that transformation. But despite their progress, there were still many unanswered questions. They hadn't been able to locate Emily's parents, and the organization they were running from was far more dangerous than Lisha had initially realized. It wasn't just a group of criminals operating on the fringes of society. They were powerful, with connections in the highest levels of government and business. Their reach was vast, and Lisha knew that if they wanted to have any chance of defeating them, they would need help. It was late one evening when Lisha decided to take the first step. They had been staying in a small apartment on the outskirts of a city, hiding in plain sight. Lisha had been scanning the local news, trying to find any leads on Emily's parents, but so far, there had been nothing. That night, however, something caught her eye: a news report about a human trafficking ring that had been exposed. It was a long shot, but it was the first real lead they had. Lisha turned to Emily, who was sitting quietly on the bed, reading a book. She hadn't said much lately, but Lisha could tell that the child was thinking about her parents. She still missed them, despite everything that had happened. Emily had asked once if her parents were alive, and Lisha had lied, telling her that they were. She had wanted to give Emily hope, even if she wasn't sure it was the truth. "We're going to make a plan," Lisha said, her voice firm but gentle. "We can't keep running forever. We need to take the fight to them." Emily looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "There's an organization that's been working with the people who took you. They're powerful and they're dangerous, but they've made mistakes and we can use that to our advantage," Lisha explained. Emily's brow furrowed. "What do we do?" Lisha smiled, her gaze softening. "We expose them. We show the world what they've been doing. And we make sure they can't hurt anyone else." It wasn't going to be easy. Lisha knew that. She wasn't naive enough to think they could just waltz into the heart of the criminal empire and bring it down. But she also knew that they had something the organization didn't: determination and a cause worth fighting for. The next day, Lisha and Emily set off on their mission. They began by tracking down the people involved in the trafficking ring, using the information they had gathered from the news reports and the underground network Lisha had been in contact with. Lisha knew she couldn't do this alone, so she reached out to a few trusted allies, humans who had once fought against similar organizations and had been left scarred by their experiences. They were small, independent groups, but they were powerful in their own way. Together, they formed a plan to take down the criminal empire piece by piece. The closer they got to their target, the more dangerous things became. Emily, though still young, insisted on helping in whatever way she could. She wanted to be part of this fight, to make sure no one else would suffer like she had. Lisha, though hesitant at first, realized that Emily was no longer just a child in need of protection. She was an active participant in their mission, and her courage gave Lisha the strength she needed to keep going. They spent the next few weeks carefully orchestrating their plan. They infiltrated the criminal network, gathering information from inside sources and slowly chipping away at the organization's operations. Lisha had a gift for blending in, for reading people, and for getting to the heart of things. She used her abilities to gather intel without being detected, but the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous their situation became. It was during one of these covert missions that Lisha's true identity was almost exposed. She had been tracking down a high-ranking member of the criminal organization, a man named Carlos, who was believed to be one of the masterminds behind the trafficking ring. Lisha had followed him for days, studying his movements, learning his habits. She had almost gotten the information she needed when he turned around and looked directly at her. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Lisha felt her heart stop. She had never been so close to being caught, but just as quickly as it had started, the moment passed. Carlos turned and walked away, oblivious to Lisha's presence. She breathed a sigh of relief, but the encounter shook her. They were getting too close. The organization was starting to notice them. They couldn't keep playing it safe anymore. Lisha knew that they had to take a bigger risk if they wanted to stop the organization. It was time to make a move. They were going to confront the people responsible for Emily's pain, for the pain of so many others. That night, they prepared for the final step of their plan. They gathered their allies, made sure they had everything they needed, and set out to confront the criminal organization's leaders. Lisha knew that this was the moment where everything would change. There was no going back now. The night was dark as they made their way through the city streets, their steps quick and quiet. Lisha's heart was pounding, but she kept her focus on the task at hand. She wasn't afraid. She had come to Earth to observe, to report, but now she was fighting for something far greater than just her mission. She was fighting for Emily's future, and for the future of every human who had ever suffered at the hands of these criminals. They reached the building where the organization's leaders were believed to be hiding. It was a fortress, guarded and protected by layers of security, but Lisha had studied it for weeks. She knew the building inside and out, and she had a plan. She turned to Emily, who was standing beside her, ready for whatever came next. "This is it," Lisha said. "Stay close to me. We'll get through this together." Emily nodded, her face determined. She had come a long way since that first day, and Lisha couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Emily had grown strong, and in many ways she had taught Lisha what it meant to care. They slipped into the building undetected, moving quickly and quietly through the halls. Lisha's heart raced as they approached the inner sanctum, where the leaders of the organization were said to be gathering. They had no time to waste. Lisha could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't hesitate. They burst into the room, catching the leaders off guard. Lisha's alien abilities allowed her to subdue them quickly, but she was careful not to kill. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice. The criminals were brought to their knees, their secrets exposed for the world to see. The authorities were called, and soon, the building was swarming with police officers. The criminal organization had been dismantled, and Emily's parents were found alive, though shaken and scared. They were grateful, but Lisha could tell that it would take time for them to heal. For now, though, the most important thing was that Emily was safe, and the people responsible for her pain would never hurt anyone again. As the dust settled and the authorities took over, Lisha and Emily stood together, looking out at the city. Lisha had come to Earth to observe, but she had found something far more important. She had found a cause worth fighting for, and in the process, she had found a family. Lisha looked down at Emily, who was holding her hand tightly. "We did it," Emily said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Lisha smiled, her heart full. Yes, we did. And as they stood there, knowing that they had made a difference, Lisha realized that her mission was complete. Not in the way she had imagined, but in a way that was far more meaningful. She had come to Earth to observe humanity, but in the end, it was humanity that had changed her.